Alright, so F, Jefferson, a reluctant warrior. So in this section, we're going to be talking about the first major foreign policy decision he has to make as president. So Jefferson in general, remember, he does not like power in the federal government, and he distrusts big armies, big standing armies, meaning armies that are just around, even not in time of warfare, because he always links big armies with dictatorships. So he doesn't trust a big army, so he limits our army to only 2,500 troops or people. Same thing with the Navy. So we have really small Navy and a really small army under Jefferson because he doesn't like them, because those are usually connected with dictatorships, forcing the people to do what you say because you have the army backing you. Alright, so the first major foreign policy decision he has to deal with are pirates in the Mediterranean Sea. Only in AP history do we talk about pirates in the Mediterranean Sea. So what happens is on the north coast of Africa, there are 4 countries that are involved with piracy. So before, what we were doing when we're a federalist or under federalists' power, like Adams and Washington for some extent, we had been bribing or paying the bribe that these states or these countries in northern Africa wanted. So we paid them money, and in return, they wouldn't attack our merchant ships. Well, Jefferson, he's the idealist, he's up here, and he's thinking, no, this is America. We don't pay bribes to pirates. So he's like, no, we're not paying a bribe anymore. This really ticks off the leader of one of those 4 countries, specifically the Pasha, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, or the leader of Tripoli. So the leader of Tripoli has kind of like an undeclared war against us. He guts down the flagstaff of the consulate in the American headquarters in Tripoli, cuts down the flagstaff, kind of throwing it in Jefferson's face. What are you going to do about it? So Jefferson's like, what am I going to do about it? I really just leave me alone. I just want to be neutral, and I just want to stay out of Europe. Can I just stay out of Europe, please? But now he's like, well, I have to deal with this, so what do I make? And he decides to send our little baby navy, our infant navy, over to the Mediterranean Sea to, prevent our merchant ships from being attacked by pirates. So the fighting goes on for about 4 years, intermittently or on and off. And finally, I think in 1806, something to that effect, well, finally 4 years later, 1805, we do find a peace. We make a peace with Tripoli, and this is called the Tripolian War. It ends up that we pay $60,000 as kind of a ransom to regain all of the American captives the Tripolian pirates had taken, and it just kind of ends. We're just like, we're done. There's no winners, there are no losers, we're just done fighting. Praise the Lord. But as a part of this, something that's kind of funny is Jefferson likes these little tiny gunboats that we were using in the Mediterranean. So they're not like these big beefy ships, they're just like these little gunboats that have like one gun, so they can maneuver easily. So as a way of protecting the United States, he creates 200 of these little gunboats. They're called Jeffs, little Jeffs, the little mosquito boats, these little boats. And it's kind of a joke. Our Navy are 200 of these little tiny ships. And it even says, the book says that during a hurricane off the coast of Georgia, one of the ships was blown 8 miles inland. 8 miles, not a super hardy boat. So people make fun of these little Jeffs. It's like, wow, we have a real exciting Navy. Yeah, these little tiny gunboats. Whatever, we're done. Reluctant warrior that has to do with the Tripolian War and with, protecting America against these pirates. Alright, the Louisiana Godshed is the next section. And that is talking about the Louisiana Purchase, more or less. So here's the deal. So before, Spain had controlled the land west of the Mississippi. So Iowa would be west of the Mississippi. So before, Spain had controlled it, and we really didn't mind Spain as being our, backyard neighbor, Spain wasn't super powerful, and we always kind of figured that, if there ever came time to, expanding west, we could just kind of kick Spain out. It wouldn't be a big deal. We had made treaties with Spain. Remember the Pinckney Treaty from last chapter that talked about that we had the right to store our grain in New Orleans, which was, of course, controlled by Spain. So we had the right to store our grain there, which was great for our farmers because they used the Mississippi to transport all their goods down to the mouth of the Mississippi at New Orleans, and then there they could sell it to West Indies or whomever they'd like. So we were happy. We were fine with Spain. We had no qualms. Spain, you're doing good. We'll probably kick you out eventually, but we don't care about it. But what happens is France gets a hold of that Spanish territory. So instead of having Spain in our backyard, we now have France. That creates some issues. Okay, France, hashtag Napoleon, hashtag what the heck. So now we have like this huge European power in our backyard, and we can't just go and eventually, just kick Napoleon out like we could with Spain. We knew that we would we would have to have a fight. We'd have to fight with France to get that territory. And we knew, our little tiny army and our little tiny navy weren't going to cut it when it came to war with France. And so we would have to make an alliance probably with Britain. So we'd have to create a British alliance and then join forces to kick Napoleon out. So we're like, oh great, let's deal with this now. Why not? Why not deal with this? Okay, so what ends up happening is Jefferson, he's all about let's make friends, not enemies. I don't want this big army. I don't want to I don't want to get in a war with Europe, that's for sure. So what he does is he sends two folks over to France to try to buy the land. Instead of fighting for the land, he wants to buy some land. So he sends James Monroe and Robert Livingston over to kind of make a deal with France. And he gives them $10 million. He's like, with this $10 million, go talk to France and try to buy, try to at least buy New Orleans from them, maybe a part of Florida. Just get them some land so that we have some room to grow. Because the farmers, now that France was in control of New Orleans, didn't have the ability to store their grain there. So the farmers were more or less at the point of they're going to take their pitchforks and their rifles and march down and attack the French because they absolutely needed access to access through New Orleans. We absolutely need to be able to store grain through New Orleans. So it was getting to the point that the farmers were like, what do we need? We have pitchforks, we'll go attack. We need this. So, Jefferson's like, okay, here's $10 million budget. Go talk to Napoleon, see if you can at least get control of New Orleans or the Mississippi. So what they do is they go and meet with him, and they was told if it doesn't go well with Napoleon, just head on over to London, start making alliance with Britain, because we know that if this buying thing doesn't work, we're going to have to fight Britain, and then we're going to need an ally in order to do that. So Jefferson's like, okay, Monroe, Livingston, if this doesn't work, just head on right on over to London and start talking about forming an alliance. So, fortunately for us, Napoleon, he was in a good mood. Not really. But Napoleon decides to actually sell. And this is kind of why. Okay, first reason. The reason Napoleon wanted Louisiana in the first place is because they could use Louisiana to ship or to supply one of their really profitable islands. What is it called? Santo Domingo. Wow, I can pronounce words. Santo Domingo, aka it's called Haiti today. That used to be France. France used to control that, so they liked having that access of Louisiana. So they used Louisiana then to supply their very profitable island. The thing was, current events showed that there was a huge slave rebellion on Santo Domingo, and therefore Napoleon lost control of that island. So he no longer needs Louisiana to supply this island because this island had a revolution of sorts and was no longer under French control. So that was one of the reasons he was willing to sell us the land. Another reason he was willing to sell us the land was because he was going to be making a peace treaty in the near future with Britain, and he knew probably as a part of this treaty he would have to give up this territory in the New World anyway. So he was like, well, I'm probably going to lose this territory to Britain the next time we make peace, so might as well make some money off of it while I can. And then thirdly, Napoleon's a smart guy. Napoleon knows that if we don't make a deal with him, if he doesn't sell us the land, that we're headed right over to London to make a treaty with Britain. And he does not want that treaty to exist. He does not want an American-English treaty at all. So because of those reasons, and among others, he decides to sell. And when he decides to sell, he's Napoleon. He does everything big. So not just giving us New Orleans and parts of Florida, he's giving us like all of his holdings in the New World. So a huge, vast chunk of land west of the Mississippi. All right, so this is called the Louisiana Purchase, right? We got all of this land, doubled the size of America more or less, for $15 million, which equated to about 3 cents an acre. That is a good deal. You can't find those deals at Walmart. Great deal. So we now have Louisiana. But Jefferson has a problem. And the problem, it's not out there, it's in his heart. He has a problem. Because remember, Jefferson has these big ideas about being very strict reading of the Constitution. And he's looking at the Constitution, probably smoking his little pipe, and he realizes there's nowhere in the Constitution that says the president or the federal government at all, for this point, has the power to make such a purchase. So in his hearts of hearts, as a true, Democratic Republican, all about states' rights, all about reading the Constitution very strictly, he knows that this purchase is unconstitutional. But, he's trying to bring those ideals to reality once again, and he just compromises as ideals. He hands over the purchase to Congress. Congress approves that in like 2 seconds, and now we have this huge chunk of land in Louisiana. Louisiana Purchase. Praise the Lord. Wonderful. All right, so next section is talking about Louisiana in the long view. Okay, so Louisiana, he's kind of talking about that as this valley of democracy. Remember, in Jefferson's mind, he's thinking that a good America, a democratic America, should be based on just a whole country of these small farmers, salt-of-the-earth people, not this manufacturing stuff, not this trade stuff. Should be a bunch of small farmers. And so Louisiana Purchase is wonderful for that. It's a lot of farmland. So that is something he likes. And it sets up the precedent of, instead of fighting for land, purchasing land. That's awesome. Good job. Yeah, and it's also a good thing too, because we don't have any backyard neighbors anymore. So because, it's not Spain in our backyard, it's not France in our backyard, we're less likely then to get involved with Europe. We just want to stay out of that mess. And so this is good. Now that we don't have these backyard neighbors, we should be pretty good at just staying out of this warfare stuff. So we like that. So of course, though, we got, we just got this whole bunch of land. We have to then, discover what we just bought. It's like a little kid who gets like a train set at Christmas. He doesn't keep it in the box. Like, he takes it out of the box and like sets it up right away. So that's us. We just got this new present. We have to explore it. We want to see what's there. And then, there steps in Lewis and Clark. We've heard of Lewis and Clark. Of course we have. So they spend 2.5 years with this expedition of 33 people. They're aided by a young Indian woman named Sacagawea, and they make better maps. They have a lot of scientific observations and drawings. They get to know the natives who live there. Lewis almost gets shot in the head by a teenage Indian, but he doesn't, so praise the Lord. And so, all of these things, they're just exploring, seeing what's there. And also the idea of now they're thinking, hey, we might actually have a land route that we can head across to the Mississippi. So they start kind of putting forth the notion that there probably is a land route that can bring us to the Pacific Ocean. So that's kind of cool. And at the end, it kind of talks about there are other explorers besides Lewis and Clark, although by far they're the most famous. Zebulon Pike was exploring Mississippi and Colorado, and there's a famous peak in the Rocky Mountains called Pike's Peak to this day. I was born in the hospital right underneath Pike's Peak in Colorado Springs. That's why I'm talking about it. It's probably not super important, but hey, why not? All right, so we take a break from Louisiana Purchase here to talk about in the next section Aaron Burr. Remember, Aaron Burr's conspiracies. They're kind of like, I don't know why they talk about these so much, but they do. So Aaron Burr is the vice president under Jefferson. Remember we talked about them accidentally tying? Yeah? Okay. So Aaron Burr is the VP under Jefferson. So after a couple years, he starts to realize that Jefferson is not going to keep him as the VP for the second term. So he starts looking elsewhere for options. So he actually runs to be governor of New York. That doesn't turn out well for him. So he starts to kind of plot. So he actually starts plotting for the succession, or the breaking away of New York and parts of New England. And Hamilton finds out about this. So Hamilton points the finger and says, hey, Aaron Burr over there, he wants New York and New England to break away from the country. Thanks a lot, Hamilton. Sheesh, mind your own business. So Aaron Burr is super mad at Hamilton for, finding him out. So Aaron Burr challenges Hamilton. Hamilton, the National Bank Hamilton, Secretary of Treasurer under George Washington, that Hamilton. Yeah, they're going to duel. It's exciting, not good, but they're going to duel. So, they set the time and the date. They actually, take the paces, turn around, and apparently Hamilton does not have abs of steel because Aaron Burr shoots him right above the hip in the gut, and a day later Hamilton dies. Well, as a result, Aaron Burr flees to, I think, South Carolina. And although Aaron Burr didn't die, his political career pretty much did. You can't really just shoot like Hamilton and be like, oh, elect me as your next congressman. That doesn't really work. So now his political career is dead, more or less. So he starts looking elsewhere for options. So he goes to the West, and he starts talking with one of the territorial governors, whose name is General James Wilkinson. And he's plotting now with Wilkinson to have all of this new territory west of the Appalachian Mountains, west of the Mississippi, all this new territory, Louisiana Purchase, that we just purchased. He's kind of plotting with this this governor to have that part of the country separate from the United States. And guess what? Aaron Burr apparently can't keep secrets. Apparently, he's found out. So Jefferson finds him out, and he imprisons Aaron Burr. And Aaron Burr is eventually, acquitted by John Marshall, and he flees to Europe. And there in Europe, Aaron Burr just can't get the message, stop trying to plot, parts of the United States. Stop trying to plot to have parts of the United States break away. So he even just goes to Europe, and then he starts talking about Napoleon. It's like, hey, Napoleon, just come on, buddy up with me, and together you can get that territory you just sold to us back. Nothing came from it. But it just kind of goes to show, the problem it is to govern this new territory. There's people, people were kind of scared, are other countries going to try to step in and take this land back? What's going to happen with this land? So Aaron Burr is he's a hot mess. He kills Hamilton. He tries to plot for the secession of a number of parts of the United States. Whatever. All right, so next section, we just got done with the Louisiana Godsend. Yep, we talked about Louisiana Longview, we talked about Aaron Burr's conspiracy, so now we're going to talk about Section J, the Precarious Neutrality. All right, so Jefferson is reelected in 1804, just very, That was easy. He was reelected. And here's the problem. France, why not, declares war, like, deliberately against Britain. So this section talks about how France was really, like, the powerhouse when it comes to land. So they called France the tiger. And that, conversely, Britain was really the powerhouse when it came to the sea. So they called Britain, like, the sharks. Okay? So now we have these two major European countries, that one is prominent in the sea, one is prominent on land. And so they don't really want to attack each other head on because they know that's not really going to work. Neither of them feel like they have a true advantage, so they're wary of actually attacking each other head on. So of course what they do, they act like little middle schoolers and they start, kind of taking jabs at one another. So indirect blows at one another, you could say. So Britain takes the first step, and what Britain does is has some edicts called the Orders of Council, which is more or less saying that we are going to close French ports in Europe. Because, of course, Britain has all this navy strength, so they could totally do that if they wanted. So they're more or less saying, we're going to close French ports in Europe to all foreign trade. The United States would be considered foreign trade. So through these orders in council, the British are now closing French ports to American trade, and all other trade for that matter. So France is like, well, I can play that game. So France is now saying, we're going to attack all merchant ships that land in British ports, which more or less cuts off trade on the, what side am I talking about? On the British side of things. So now America's just, stuck between a rock and a hard place. We're more or less screwed because if we try to trade in British ports, the French will attack our ships, and if we try to trade in French ports, the British will try to attack our ships. I'm like, this is great fun. This is great. We wanted to remain neutral, and now we can't, pretty much. We have to, choose a side. And you know what? Thomas Jefferson doesn't want to choose a side, so he says, hey, you know what? If you're going to attack our ships, guess what? We don't want to trade with anybody. So he sets something up called the embargo. All right, and we'll talk about that next section, but something I need to point out here is what they're also doing at the same time. What the British are also doing, besides attacking our merchant ships when we're trying to trade with France, they're doing something called impressment. That means that they would more or less overtake an American ship and force all of those American sailors to become members of the British Navy. They'd hop on ship, beat them up the head. Once they're knocked unconscious, they would take them, and then they would force them to become a part of the British Navy. So, over 3 years, it says, they had done this to over 6,000 Americans. They had impressed them, which meant they would go on their ships, knock them up the head. Once they're unconscious, they would take them, and then they would force them, kind of just as a recruitment tool, to become part of the British Navy. And the reason they were doing this is literally just to get more sailors in the British Navy. It was just a kind of a mean thing they did. And so one of the examples of this impressment is called the Chesapeake Affair. So 10 miles off the coast of Virginia, a British ship kind of pulled over, so to speak, an American ship, and under the pretension of saying, oh, you have 4 deserters or 4 British sailors who had deserted our ranks, and we need to get those back. It was just a thinly veiled lie of saying, oh, we're going to steal 4 of your sailors and impress them, making them become part of our Navy. And, they refused. The American ship was like, no, you're not going to do that. So the British ship attacked the American ship. 3 were killed, 18 were wounded, and really this is just an example of this impressment of Americans by the British, and this is called the Chesapeake Affair, it really, really, really caused an uproar in America because it was just 10 miles off their coast. All right, so the next section we will then talk about impressment and go from, not impressment, embargo, and we'll go from there.